that?
Who is that?
Yeah.
That's Israeli.
Who is that?
First.
Who is that?
So who's the hostage? Or in Gaza. Just trying to remember. Okay, promise.
Yeah.
Over here.
What is it? Discuss.
All right.
What that means that?
Right now, it's about 5 minutes. Right here.
Yeah.
Mark Poloncarz.
Who's my Poloncarz? Who's my Poloncarz?
He's the guy we said. He was sitting with us in the
Yeah. Where's he from?
he's the county executive.
What country is that in? Right. There's a meeting here. It's gonna be the room at your restaurant.
Did you hear it? That's here.
Yeah.
Big crowd. Yeah. Really see
With Ellen.
So we're going to get started. If everyone could, stragglers in the foyer could come in and sit down. So, welcome everyone. I'm Dan Kester, president of the men's group here. Welcome to you, welcome to the people at home watching. Hi out there. A couple men's group announcements. We have two, often I kind of schedule these like a week before trying to find someone, but I'm actually now like way ahead of schedule, so I can pat myself in the back. March 3rd, Robbie Hausman, he's a cellist for the BPO. He'll be coming here talking about what it's like to work for the BPO and being a part of the orchestra. So that's gonna be really interesting. I think he's gonna bring his cello and play some tunes for us. April 7th is the talk that was supposed to be in January but got snowed out, and that's Rob Goldberg, who's director of the Federation, and Blaine Schwartz, who's a Temple member here and former president. They'll be talking about the Federation trip to the United Arab Emirates, which was last year, and showing pictures, and that should be real interesting too. That's in April. People can still donate to the men's group. I got a few today, so thank you for that. Just, you can write a check, give it to me, drop it off at the office, $36, quite a bargain. So I've been interested in politics my whole life, starting with going door to door for George McGovern, to tell you something about my age and my politics. And when I came to Buffalo, I saw some announcement about that they were trying to get people to volunteer for the Democratic Party. So I said, that sounds interesting. So I went to this, it was an old Statler building, was the office, and there was a meeting of a dozen people, and there was this guy who was running the session, young guy, real energetic, got us real enthused about it, introduced us to Len Lanahan, the chairman, and I was thinking, wow, this guy's really good. I bet he's going to run for office one day. And like a year later, I suddenly see the guy's picture in the paper running for controller, and that was Mark Poloncarz. So, my next run-in with Mr. Poloncarz was at the Yom HaShoah. The county executive and the mayor's office would alternate every year doing I'm not sure what they called it, but they'd have an event at their office, and the TV cameras would be there. And it was I was part of the Holocaust Research Center at the time, and as that went to the office, and it was a really nice event, and thank you for doing that. We appreciate that. And I talked to Mr. Poloncarz a bit. He said, oh, you got to see my office, and he went in there and had a great view, and I was like, wow, this is really nice. And he started telling me about his own family's history in Poland during the war, which was interesting. I hope you might be able to share some of that with us today. So I thought this would be a great guy to have come speak to the men's group. So I called his office and got him scheduled for March 15th, 2020. And it was actually interesting because in January of that year, we had Gail Burstein here, the Erie County Medical Examiner, who's here with her parents. Health Commissioner. And I remember you talked a lot about opioids. I don't remember any mention of COVID. And so Mr. Poloncarz was scheduled March 15th, like 3 days before. His office sends me an email. We're going to have to cancel, and we'll do it like later this year. Little did we know. But I'm glad you're here now, and turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dad. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, this is the longest postponement of any event during my tenure as county executive. It was scheduled, and we were talking before, and I remember we had it scheduled for like March or April. He's like, yeah, March 15th of 2020. I go, yeah, that's when things really started to go downhill very quickly. And that's a time when Dr. Burstein and I spent a lot of hours together. And you want to be seen by Dr. Burstein. You don't want to be seen by our medical examiner. If you're being seen by our medical examiner, you've had a bad day. So our health commissioner, Dr. Burstein, and I spent a lot of time during that period. And I had seen the folks who worked in the health department, epidemiology department, and division through the years, but I didn't get to know them. And then very shortly, we all became family because we were spending 16-hour days in the Rath building where the rest of the building was shut down. The rest of downtown was shut down. Everything was shut down. For those of you who know where I live on Delaware Avenue in Buffalo, and I used to say, I always had a short drive to work. It was like 10 minutes. Well, I could get to work in like 2 minutes because I could just fly down. There wasn't another car going down the road. It was a time that we'll never forget and hopefully never go through again. And it was bad. More than 3,300 county residents died between the period of March 15th to pretty much February of 23 when we really stopped keeping count because of the way the rules were changed. And I think every one of us knows someone who, if not personally, we lost, or know someone who lost someone, and what we went through during that period. And what came of it is part of what I wanted to talk about today, which is also not just good government, because a government needs to be there at a time of need for people. There's certain things the private sector does well, but there's things they can't do. And when it comes to leading a community through a global pandemic or other types of issues that we deal with in county government, like child protective services, there's no profit margin to be made in some of these areas. So business can't take the lead, the government must. And we saw government at its finest and at its worst in many ways during the COVID-19 pandemic, depending on where you were and what you watched. But I'm very proud of the work that was done by the health department, by the team led by Dr. Burstein, and I just want to thank her for all the good work. Thank you. In Erie County government, we're much larger than I think people realize as a community, as a county, as well as in some ways a government because of the services that we provide. Erie County is 955,000 or so residents, which is greater than 5 states. So it's larger than the states of Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, Vermont, and Alaska. Each of those states gets 2 senators in Washington, D.C. We don't. We have 2 senators in New York. But it just goes to show the size of our community. And it's geographically about the same size as the state of Rhode Island. It's urban, suburban, and rural. It's actually one of the larger geographic counties in New York State. If you look at the map of counties across the United States, and I'm a member on the executive board of the National Association of Counties, most counties are very small in geographic size. California is kind of an outlier. They have some very large geographic counties, but Erie County is neat because it's like, as county executive, I'm governor of a small state because I have urban issues, I have rural issues, I have suburban issues. We have a difference in many ways in the services that are provided depending on where you live. And I think it makes the job, and it's one of the reasons why I have continued to run, though as most people know, I think this is my last term. I will not run for a 5th term, even though I could. I think it's time to, after this term, finish our work and move on. But it's an interesting job. It's never boring. Dr. Burstein will certainly say that, because we're always dealing. I used to joke when I'd walk around the department, it's like, well, what's the latest pandemic? What's the latest pox on society? And they go, monkeypox. I go, oh boy, I shouldn't even have asked. But these are the things that we deal with, and it's never the same. It is a job when you have an opportunity to make a difference in the community, to leave a legacy behind, but you're always dealing with a lot of the nuts and bolts on how to just provide services to the greater community. And it ranges from, as I said, child protective services, ensuring that a defenseless child is protected against an abusive adult, to adult protective services, in which you have seniors and which should be their golden years, but in very bad situations because they're either physically or mentally in a bad situation or being taken advantage of financially. So we see the gamut from birth to death. And when it comes to the medical examiner's office, post-death. So it is not boring. I do consider it a privilege, and I want to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to once again serve as your county executive. County government is on the forefront of so many issues. There's nothing in your life in some ways that we don't touch, except for pretty much garbage pickup. But we are the provider of the overarching services for local fire departments. We're the leaders during a crisis in our community. If you call on your cell phone 911, you will go first to, that call will be routed downtown to Erie County's 911 call center in the public safety building, handled by Erie County call takers, and then they will move the call out as needed. So there's really no aspect of life that we don't touch, from the health of the community, to the roads, to parks, to libraries. And it's one of the reasons why when in times of crises you see county government at the lead, but you also will see county government have its finger pointed at it, myself and others, for the actions that we take. And I'll never regret nor apologize for the actions that we took during the COVID-19 pandemic, because it was bad. It was very bad. There was no antivirals. There was no real treatment in the early on stages. We know how many people were lost in our community. Every loss was one too many, but it could have been so much worse. And all you have to do is look at the statistics from other states that did not close, including ones that are warmer and supposedly don't have as much passage and transmission of diseases. Well, their death rates per capita were much higher than what we had here. And I think it's a testament to the community that they were able to come together at a time of crisis to say, okay, we need to do this for the greater good. And that's what government is. It's acting on behalf of the greater good. Not every individual is going to be happy with the decisions you make. I understand that. Show me an elected official whom everybody loves, and I'll show you an elected official who's accomplished nothing. They'll go around shaking hands, slapping backs, but what have they accomplished? Because inevitably, if you're going to do things, you're going to tick some people off. And in a situation like that, you can tick off a lot of people pretty quickly. And it's led in some ways in our community and, of course, nationwide to what I wanted to talk about before we open it up to questions is the rise of extremism in our country. Of course, the Jewish community has seen it for a long time, but it's now open to everyone. Because in the past, you could, if you were an extremist before the internet, you could subscribe to some sort of mail type of letter, and there was you didn't know how someone else believes in the same thing I believe in. Now you can go to the internet and find tens of thousands or millions of people, and many of them fake, just accounts that are created that seem to justify the actions that people take. We saw it during COVID. We saw it with the threats, and there were threats on the lives of myself and Dr. Burstein for the things that we were doing just to protect the public. And it was bad. And it was anti-Semitic too, some of the things that were said. And I'm very glad that members of our community stepped up and said, no, not in our community. Our local law enforcement took it very seriously. Individuals were prosecuted, but it wasn't always the case. There was one individual that we received a number of nasty, horrible, anti-Semitic emails that we were able to pinpoint where they were from, and they weren't in Erie County. They were coming from Washoe County, Nevada, where Reno is. And we're like, why would somebody in Reno care about what's going on here? And a lot of it was related to, oh, you're not allowing people who are unvaccinated to attend football games. So just a reminder, everybody, whatever you do on your cell phone, eventually they'll figure out who you are. And we were able to pinpoint, because they used an AT&T phone, how it came, where it came from. They identified it. The local police went out, drove to the house, and there in front of the house was a flag for the Buffalo Bills flying in front of the house. The individual was from Brockport originally. The bad part about this, the local district attorney in Washoe County did not want to prosecute the person. even though there were death threats against myself and the doctor, because they felt like, they're in Reno, you're in Buffalo, there was no imminent harm. That's disappointing, because the government needs to also say this is unacceptable. You do not have the right to threaten someone with death just because you disagree with their policies. Those are some of the things we've seen. Now, the person that they talked to was like, oh, I didn't mean it. I was drunk. It was the middle of the night. It was 5 days in a row. Those are the kind of things that unfortunately have been created and shown at a much higher degree in the last 5 years, and it affects us on the local level. I still deal with issues associated with people who disagree with my policies in a manner that is not what you would consider a conversation between individuals, a discourse in the public good. I'm fine with that. I can deal with that. It shouldn't happen. It certainly shouldn't happen to good public servants like the doctor or others who get threats associated with the decisions that they make, but that's some of the stuff that we've dealt with. And one of the things I've been talking about in the last year, and I'm grateful to see it, as some of my fellow elected officials on the county level across the United States are talking about it as well, Democrats and Republicans, is you can disagree with an individual, but you don't have to do it in such a manner where it becomes violent. And unfortunately, that is what we're seeing in the country lately, is a belief that violence solves problems. Violence solves issues at the ballot box. It should not. I have a very good friend, Adrian Fontes, who's now the Secretary of State of the state of Arizona. He received so many death threats because he was the county recorder of Maricopa County during the 2020 election. And he lost his next election. He lost his next election to an individual. Adrian's a Democrat, the gentleman came in as a Republican, but the Republican came in and said, there was nothing wrong with this election. Donald Trump just lost Maricopa County. That individual, Stephen Richer, has received death threats from the same people who gave death threats to Adrian Fontes, because they don't want to believe it. And what I think is it's important that there's people like Stephen Richer out there, or the individuals, Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, who stood up and said, you just have to accept it sometimes. You can lose an election. It doesn't mean an election was stolen. The problem is it's now diluted so many people's mind, they question all elections. And it's sad, because one of the things that we have in our system in the United States, no matter how flawed it may be in other areas, is we have strong protections on elections. We know that elections are won or lost by certain candidates because of the protections that are in place. Just here in Erie County, the Erie County Board of Elections is run by the Democrats and Republicans. For every Democratic employee, there's one Republican employee, and so on. When you go to the vote and you go to the table, you'll see usually 4 people there. There's 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. It's to ensure that everything is done fairly. Sometimes you'll see 3, but you'll always have at least one person from the opposing party sitting there to ensure that nothing is done that would render the election to be questioned. The problem is people just don't believe it. I'll probably remember Daniel Patrick Moynihan, our former senator, brilliant mind. He had a saying that was appropriate in almost every situation, especially what we're dealing with today, is you're entitled to your own opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts. And what's unfortunately happened in the last few years is a growth of alternative facts. There's only one set of facts. The facts are as they are. You may not like the result, but here's what they are. And so what I think is important is for the public and others to say, whether it's county government, issues on the federal level or so forth, we have as a community have to stand up to those who want to pervade our belief in our community as to what is actually occurring. We know what's occurring. We can talk about what's occurring, and we can disagree on the outcome of it and what it means, but we can also agree on the facts. And that's what happens on the local level, especially with elections. There's a Republican election commissioner, Ralph Moore, and there's a Democratic election commissioner, Jeremy Zellner. And the Republican election commissioner, Ralph Moore, is one of the most vocal ones about the protection of elections and the facts of the situation, because he feels it is his responsibility as an official of our community to say, no, these are the people who won, these are the people who lost. You may not like it, but that was the will of the people, and that's the society we have today. So what I'm asking folks is whether it's an issue associated with, and I know it's a big one here in Amherst, associated with taxes right now. You can disagree on the motive behind it, but there's a reason behind it. If you dislike it, you shouldn't be threatening Brian Kulpa's life. If you dislike it, you should run for office. A lot of people want to talk, but they don't want to actually put themselves out there and actually try to make a community better. So when I talk lately, I want to remind everybody that it is incumbent upon all of us to, when we see false information, when we hear anti-Semitic statements, bigotry, other types of racially motivated or religiously motivated slander and so forth, we have an obligation as citizens to say, no, you're wrong, and to call it out. Because the only way these individuals can grow and succeed in their views is if good people stand by and do nothing. That's when bad things happen. So I think it's important and incumbent upon all of us to realize that we have a responsibility in our community. If somebody's out there saying this election was stolen, it's like, no, it wasn't. Here's why. Because you had a Democratic and Republican, a board of elections running the election and ensuring that everything was done fairly. When individuals may disagree about decisions rendered about a community with regards to COVID-19, others need to say, well, you can disagree as to why it was done, but taking it to the next step and threatening individuals is wrong. This community faced one of the worst situations any community can, the worst. I would not wish it on any other community. And that's what happened in May with the shooting, not this most recent May, in 2022, the shooting at the Tops. I was there 40 minutes afterwards. I did not go into the Tops, but I was outside. It was horrible. And why did it happen? Because someone who was deluded by social media and other things that they saw decided to come into our community to kill as many African Americans as he could. He had a plan. He was not just going to stop at Tops. He was going to drive straight down Jefferson Avenue and shoot as many blacks as he could find. I grew up in a society where there were not mass shootings. And then all of a sudden we had mass shootings. We could talk a whole different issue about that. But today we're in a society where someone believes that because they're getting so deluded by what they're hearing, misinformation, false information, that African Americans are coming to replace them, that he drove 200 plus miles to come to our community to kill as many blacks as he could. Why? Because he felt like he was doing a benefit to society by eliminating people who were threatening to him. Those individuals weren't threatening to him. They just went there to go shopping. A horrible situation that I would not wish on any community. And unfortunately now I'm part of a group of county leaders from communities who've had mass shootings. And we're sort of like if something bad happens in another community, we're there to talk the local official through what to expect, what to happen, what you're going to see in your community as a result of this. And I look at it as that's why it's important that we all have an opportunity and a responsibility, I should say, to call out others when they are saying things that are delusional, when they are saying things that are just wrong. Because if we don't, who will? Just because someone calls himself a patriot doesn't mean they're a patriot. History will determine for the individuals that were involved in January 6th whether they're a patriot or a traitor, and pretty much all of them are being determined as traitors, including an individual from Amherst, Thomas Civic, who was involved in the beating on Officer Michael Fanone, taking his badge off of him and bringing it home as if it was some prize of the day. He's now spending up to 5 years in jail. It's an Amherst resident. Only Franklin County, Ohio had more people involved in the January 6th insurrection than Erie County based on number of arrests. It's everywhere. This is a blue county, supposedly blue county, but there are a lot of angry people out there. And that's why I say to all, we all have an obligation to stand up and address extremism in whatever form it comes. Anti-Semitism, of course. Association with race, of course. But also, when people are saying things that are just patently false about government and the decisions that are made, I think we all have an obligation to say, well, that's your opinion, but that's not what's going on. Because everyone's entitled to their opinion. They're not entitled to their own facts. And what happens is, why this matters, good people do not want to run for office anymore. Of both parties. Like, why would I ever want to put my family through that? Good people don't want to serve in government anymore because they're like, I could just work in just my job in the private sector, not have to deal with that and worry about my family getting threats because they're a nurse who just happens to be working at a COVID-19 vaccine clinic and people threatening them because they're doing their job trying to help people in the community. This is why it matters. The America that I know has never been perfect. We always strive to form a more perfect union. It's never perfect. Look at the history of it. We fought a civil war over slavery. We've dealt with so many issues that when you talk about America and people put it on this pedestal, it's like, yeah, we are the greatest country in the world, but we're not imperfect. But we need to realize that we've gotten through those situations because good people said, no, I'm not going to allow that to happen in my community. I'm not going to allow that to happen in my country. And that's what I ask everybody that I'm talking to today is, I don't care what your political party is, but if you see things that are false, if you see people who are spreading misinformation and lies, you have to say something. You have to say, no, that's not true. Because what you need to do is note, you're creating a problem, even if the person doesn't realize it, that is greater and having a huge impact on our overall country. So I ask each and every one of you to think about this as you leave. If you see someone who's saying something anti-Semitic, what are you going to do? Of course, you're going to respond. The Jewish community knows what to do when they're attacked. But you have to think about it in other ways too. Because the attack on our democracy that we're dealing with today is a serious one that could have real long-term impacts on whether we are going to continue to be the republic that we've striven to be for more than 200 years now. My time as county executive will be ending at the end of this term. There will be someone who follows me. There's county executives before me, and there will be one after, just like there were comptrollers before me and comptrollers after. The key is to ensure that we have a civil society that allows for these elections to continue, and that whomever the people choose is an individual that you can trust, whether it doesn't matter about the political party. There's individuals, I'm a Democrat, I think most of you know, but there are individuals who, if were elected president from a Republican Party, I'd be fine with. Wouldn't agree with their policies, but I wouldn't feel like our democracy was at risk. And that's what I ask each and every one of you to do as you think about it, to be, as you leave here today, to be advocates for our democracy and our democratic values, small d values. Understanding that in a civil society, in a society that is built on liberty and also community, there's never going to be 100% agreement. But we can't have 100% liberty or 100% community. We have to find a way to bring those together and create a better society for all. That's what we try to do in county government, create a better community for all. I believe since I've taken office, we've left this community in better shape than when we took it. There are actually more people working in Erie County today than there were prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. More people since my terms of office started. We went through a horrible situation, but the economy has turned around. There are more businesses today than there were prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some businesses went out of business, other new ones were created. It's what happens in a society when you work together to try to create a better community for all. And no matter what we do, no matter what I say, I guarantee you on my last day in office, no matter how good we left the community, someone will complain about the roads. And I'll leave it with that. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask any questions on anything in county government or just government in general. And it is my pleasure. I really appreciate the congregation for inviting me. And I'm sorry it took 4 years to finally come back.
Please keep in mind that everyone's here to hear what Mr. Poloncarz has to say. So please ask a question, no speeches. If you want to give speeches, run for office, or bring it up forward. No, just give speeches.
I think the first one came back there. No. The question was, am I term limited? And the answer is no. There are no term limits in county government. My view of term limits, personally, is there are term limits every time there's an election. The community can vote someone out if they don't like them. whatever the city, the village, the town, the county, state. I think that term limits are, it's an easy way of saying, oh, we get better government if we have new people constantly coming in. That's not always the case. Sometimes there are people who've been around for a long time and probably don't need to be there anymore. But I practiced law for a number of years, and I like to use the analogy. If you're going to talk to someone about a complicated legal case, do you talk to the person who just graduated from law school? No, you talk to the practitioner who's been doing it for 20 years or more. If you have an issue with your health, do you go to the person who just graduated from medical school and is just finishing their residency? No. You talk to the person who's done it for a long time because you want someone who's got expertise. Well, expertise in government matters. You get things accomplished, you know how to work the wheels of government. So I'm not a fan of term limits, but the office is not term limited. There are no term limits in Erie County for any of the offices, including the legislature and the other independently elected officials. Yes, sir, you were next. The question is, what am I going to do? I don't know. We'll figure it out. I got 3 years and basically 10 months and 27 days or so. So I got some time, but I don't know. I mean, we'll figure it out. In the meantime, I know there's going to be some important things that are going to be dealing with in county government one way or another. Because the one thing I learned is, and I say this to many of my staff members, is don't assume anything. Just when you think things are great, then all of a sudden, oh my God, what just happened? So there'll be additional challenges during this tenure, and then we'll figure out what happens after that. Lauren in the back, you were next.
Yeah, thanks for coming out, Mark. What are your top priorities for your last term?
The question was, what are my top priorities during my last term? We have a lot of things that we've been working on that still need to progress. Of course, during this last term, we will complete the construction of the new stadium for the Buffalo Bills. And I'll be glad to talk a little bit more about that if people want to talk about the backstory of that. I also want to continue in the completion of the work associated with the Renaissance Commerce Park in Lackawanna, where the Bethlehem Steel Complex was. The site sat vacant for decades. My father worked as a steel worker at Bethlehem Steel. I grew up in Lackawanna. I watched elected official after elected official in all political parties say, we're going to redo it. And nobody did it because it was too big a project to take on. But we did it. There's businesses that are returning there. There's hundreds of jobs that have been created at this site where nothing was there for decades. I want to finish that work. We're going to be building an agriculturally related industrial park in the southern part of Erie County in the town of Evans near Angola to meet the needs of that community because we have a lot of agricultural producers down there, as well as parties that rely on agriculture, but we don't have the green space, so to speak, for them to build new industry and new buildings. So we're working on that. A big thing that we announced before COVID-19 that kind of got put on the back burner, it was our Live Well Erie Health and Human Services Plan to ensure that our community lives its best life possible, especially targeting children, seniors, and working families. We had to put that on the back burner, but it's now out there again because we want to focus on that. And then one of the things that came out of COVID-19 as well as the shooting was the creation of the Office of Health Equity. We know that our country has the greatest health system when it comes to health technology, but not a good health system when it comes to the delivery of health for the people who need it at the time they need it. And simple as this, depending on your bank account, you can get better health care than someone who can't. So we created the Office of Health Equity, which is a division of the Department of Health, and we're continuing to work on a number of projects there. So we got some big ticket projects, always little things. We're doing roads, we're doing sewers. Sewers are very expensive, using American Rescue Plan funds to help redo our sewage treatment plant in Hamburg, the Woodlawn Beach plant. I still question, and this is a decision that was made back in the 1970s, why they put a sewage treatment plant right next to the public beach. And the Department of Health, little known fact, sends out people to test the water at beaches, all the public beaches. And there's often days in which we have to shut it down, usually after rain, because you get a lot of overflow through the storm sewers. So we need to ensure that we have the cleanest water, because the one advantage we have a community over anywhere else in the United States is we have the water. And I talked to colleagues. Bridget Shea is a Travis County commissioner. Travis County is Austin, one of the most exploding communities in the United States. And she goes, 20 years from now, Buffalo's going to be, what is Austin will be Buffalo. We don't have the water. We can't keep up with the development. It's just too much. And who's going to move their business? Who's going to move into the community if you can't get access to fresh water? We have the fresh water. We have to keep it fresh. We have to keep it clean. That's why we invest in sewage treatment facilities. And then we work on the national level with our partners to ensure that we reduce the agricultural runoff, which often causes problems in Lake Erie. The green algae bloom. I couldn't think of it. The algae blooms that affect the people on the western part of Lake Erie are a direct result of agricultural runoff from Indiana and Ohio and even further in, because it comes through the Maumee River and it lets out at the western end of Lake Erie. Well, we don't want algae blooms here because that would affect industry, it would affect our clean water. So, long answer to a short question, we have a lot on our plate. Yes, sir. I'll go you and then you. I'll go you first.
First of all, thank you for fixing the road.
Thanks.
I was going to ask you about the stadium and the bills in general.
Mhm.
Because you have these negotiations with them and the whole stadium deal and everything. And talk about that, how intense that was and how nerve-wracking that was and how dangerous that was.
The question was about the Bills Stadium, how intense it was, how nerve-wracking it was, how dangerous it was. It would have been dangerous to my life if the Bills left. Because if I thought I'd get a lot of threats with regards to COVID-19 and other things that I'm doing, I can only imagine the threats I would have received if the Bills moved. And it was a real issue. The Bills moving was not something that we wanted to deal with, but could happen. We never had a threat from Terry Pagula that I'm moving unless you do this. But we kept on hearing from their subordinates, well, if we move to Orlando or we move to Austin, here's how much money, more money we'd make. And it's a real point. They would make more money. Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, California, is where San Francisco 49ers play. They built this new stadium. They have personal seat licenses, PSLs, between the 40-yard lines, in which they charge $80,000 per seat. You have to pay $80,000 payable, I think, over 10 years, but still, per seat just to buy a season ticket. That's the modern NFL. And if they went to Austin, home of Dell and other companies, or they went to Orlando, the home of the mouse that fought with their governor, you'd be paying that. So that's what we're dealing with in the modern NFL. So we never got a threat that we're moving, but we knew if we didn't get a deal done, they probably would move. Right now, the stadium is projected to cost somewhere around $1.7 billion. The amount of money that government putting in is locked. One of the provisions that I demanded, because the Bills wanted to control the choice of architecture and the design and the project manager, I said, fine, if you're going to control that aspect of the construction, then you have to absorb all cost overruns. We announced the deal was a $1.4 billion deal. It's now about 1.7. We knew there'd be cost overruns. Construction projects have cost overruns. So what the county's contribution is $250 million. If it is 1.7, that doesn't change. That's about 14% of the cost of the stadium, which is not really that much when you think about it. And it's less than what we would pay as part of the current arrangement if we had continued it for another 30 years. So we're putting the money up front, but then we have no further obligation. The county will no longer own the stadium. It'll be transferred to New York State. Currently, the stadium's owned by Erie County. We lease it to New York State, who subleases it to the Bills. Why did I want the county out of the stadium business? There's a number of reasons why. The first one is then we have an ongoing obligation associated with maintaining the facility as the owner. We no longer have that obligation. The second thing is liability. I'm sure there's lawyers out there. If you know somebody trips and falls and hits their head at the stadium, They're going to do a lawsuit. Who do they sue? Well, they sue the tenant and they sue the landlords. You own it. So we get lots of lawsuits associated with what goes on in the stadium. In the end, we were able to negotiate what I thought was a fair deal. I think Mr. Bagul is a little not happy right now is the best way to put it. The person who negotiated the deal for him was fired. And I believe he was fired because Mr. Bagul did not think he'd be putting another $300 million more than what he originally agreed to, and that's what he is. So right now, if it's 1.7, the governmental end, the county will be paying 14%, the state will be paying 36%, so we're paying 50%, and the bills will be paying 50%. Pretty fair in the modern NFL, where the most recent stadium deal, Tennessee's putting in more than $1 billion associated with the new stadium in Tennessee, and that's including Nashville. So you're never going to get everything you want. We knew no matter what, it was going to be a problem for me when we announced that we got a stadium deal, but the county was putting money in because I heard it over and over and over. You need to build a new stadium. The bills can't move. Don't put a penny into the stadium. Well, if we're going to build a new stadium and the bills aren't going to move, the government was going to have to put in some of the money. It's as simple as that. And we did. And in the end, it'll be a 50-50 deal with the county only paying 14% and having no further obligation in the future. I think that's a pretty good deal for us locally. The state is locked as well. It was the provision I demanded. We got community benefits agreement in which they're going to provide $100 million over the life of the lease. The next closest community benefits agreement among an NFL team is only $6 million. We got a community benefits agreement. We got a local labor agreement. We just saw that if you checked out the Buffalo News, there's a story that came out that 60% of the steel in the stadium is going to be fabricated in New York State. So this is benefiting a lot of folks. And I think it's a good thing in the long run. Because when I like to talk about it, people said, oh, you just gave him a blank check. You opened up your wallet and you just gave Mr. Bagul all that money. No, it goes into a segregated fund and it's used for construction on the stadium. And you know who gets it? The men and women who work on the stadium, who are getting paid. Those are the individuals who receive the money, not Terry or Kim Pagula. And in the end, it worked out for us, I believe.
One of the political parties is particularly good at establishing their own facts. And I think it trickles down from the leader of that party. So I'm just wondering your thoughts. Once that leader is eliminated from the political scene, illness, death, do you think we're in a new normal state now, or will things transition back to where things were? I mean, we've been divided even before.
Oh, yeah. Country's always been divided. The question was in regards to a certain political party and alternative facts that are being spewed by a leader in that party. And if the individual's not there, will it continue? I don't think it will continue to the same level. I know I have colleagues across the country, and I won't name them, that are Republicans, who are really good people. If they were running, if I was living in their community, if I moved to the community and they were running for office, I'd probably vote for them because I know them personally and they're good people. But I ask them, why don't you stand up and say this is wrong? And the one thing that bothers me about each and every one of them is if I did that, I'd lose. I'd lose in a primary. I couldn't even get to the general election. And that's scary. I think on the overarching governmental level, I think it will change, but I'm worried about the institutional level of individuals. Now, I will note that in a lot of elections where extremist candidates run, they generally, if it's a fairly moderate community or 50-50 breakdown, they don't win. They generally lose. And my election this most recent year was a good example of it. Not only did I win by a large margin, but I know I got Republican votes. Simple as that. And I'm grateful for it. Because it also said that individuals in the Republican Party said, I'd rather vote for the Democrat, who I don't agree with on all policies, but at least I know is running a good government, than the extremist who's talking about things that I disagree, that just are wrong. I think on the national level, I believe that'll continue. We'll see with the election this year. but I do feel over time it'll subside. But I'm hopeful. I've always been hopeful. Our president likes to talk. He has the greatest hope for our country. He feels this is the best time. And I know he's doing it also as a cheerleader, because there's a lot of other people who aren't as hopeful. But only time will tell. And I say that because last October, there's a magazine that politicos follow in New York State called City and State. It does issues about New York City and the rest of the state. And they did a profile on my race, and it talked, will Mark Poloncarz be reelected to a fourth term, or will Chrissy Casilio, an unknown, do the unthinkable and beat him? Only time will tell. Well, time told. And I think the same thing will happen this year. There's a realization coming around among many people who did not believe that Donald Trump would be the nominee of the Republican Party this year. Didn't think so. Now they're realizing he's probably going to be the nominee. And you're seeing it in the polling, the most recent polling data that shows that Joe Biden is going up in the polls. The economy's better. That's always good. It's always good when the economy's stronger. But I think a lot of folks who are like, I'm taking a wait and see attitude, now they're realizing it's 2020 all over again. And we'll see where it goes. And a lot has changed since 2020, including what occurred on January 6th. I'll go with you, sir.
There was a time when Buffalo had two vibrant newspapers
Mm-hmm.
that were chock full of local news about school board elections and our issues, local political races. Now we have only one newspaper, and it's kind of a hollowed-out affair with half of its coverage copied from the New York Times and so forth. I feel it's a real loss to the community. What can be done to restore a community feeling? It seems to go beyond what teachers tell their students in civics classes.
Yeah, I'll because I know not everybody could hear it. The question was, at one time Buffalo had two vibrant, strong newspapers. We're down to one. It's now hollowed out. It's not what it used to be. What can be done to overcome that? I'm actually pretty good friends with the publisher of the Buffalo News, and he's not happy about what's happened. These are corporate decisions being made by Lee Enterprises to just basically cut and cut and cut and cut and create a product that is what it is today, which is pretty sad. I've had my fights with the media. I don't always agree with them, and some of the stuff they published, when we talk about alternative facts, I tell them, there's one set of facts. Someone may say this is what they think it is, but just because that's what they think doesn't mean that's the truth. And you shouldn't be in the business of, Joe said X, county executive said Y, you decide. No, media should, here's what's actually happening. But hold people accountable when it's appropriate to hold people accountable. The degradation of the old newspaper industry is going to continue. There's no doubt about it. The vast majority of people under the age of 35 do not get their news from usual media. Even if they happen to read a story on their phone from a Buffalo News story, that's rare. Most of them are getting their news from alternative sources, podcasts, things like that, websites. And that's what's scary, because you can put a website out, you can put a podcast out in a very short period of time, have thousands and thousands of listeners or readers, and your stuff be complete bunk. That's why it's important that people come out and say, no, that's false. I don't know what the answer is. The publisher is unhappy. He says, I talked to him, Tom Wiley, and he says he's fighting to protect, and it's just the decisions are being made by the cost cutters in Lee Enterprises, and the result is we get a substandard paper from what we expect. I mean, not just in news coverage, every other type of coverage has been decimated except sports. If there was no Buffalo Bills, the paper would not exist. I'm serious. It is Buffalo Bills coverage that guarantees they get a significant amount of people still buying the newspaper, as well as registering for it online. But that's modern news today. There's very few communities that have thriving newspapers anymore. And there's almost no communities that have two newspapers except for the largest communities that can support them. I don't know what the answer is other than having alternative news sources that are strong, But the one thing that the internet created when it came to the news was the beast where people don't want to pay for news. They paid for the paper because they felt they were getting something in the paper, including coupons. I paid $1 for the paper, but I got $4 in coupons. It was worth it. But when you just can get anything you want on your phone for free, paying for news service coverage is something that is, like, if you look at the demographics of it, it is gone.
Is there anything else that could promote a community feeling?
Anything else that could promote a community feeling? Well, yeah, I mean, that's what social media and other stuff is great for, is I can communicate directly with the public today where I couldn't when I first started office. I'm actually writing a book. I wrote a book once before about the Bills lease in the first one. I'm writing a second book. It's not just about the Bills. It's about all kinds of government issues. It's called Campaigning is Hard, Governing is Harder. And it's vignettes about politics, issues I dealt with in government, and like a learning for others, so they learn, okay, here's some of the issues. But one of the chapters I'm writing about is social media is not real. But it starts out, the greatest sea change I've seen since I first took office as county controller today is the impact of internet and social media sites on our discourse. Social media is not real. A lot of the stuff that you see is fake. It's bots, it's AI, it's trolls that have 17 different accounts just to attack. It's amazing. I will post something, and I know they're bots, because I will post something on Twitter, and I'll have a response, a whole paragraph's response in 10 seconds. I'm like, I don't think the average human can type that quickly, blasting what I'm doing. But it's set up now that someone could do a bot that's AI to automatically respond to something that I post. And that's why you gotta fight it. But it also is a great resource because I can immediately reach out to the public where I couldn't before. And what was most noticeable is during snowstorms. We would post things on social media. It would get shared by 1,000 people. And I'd look in a very short period of time, that post on Facebook or on Twitter/X would have 200,000 views. That did not exist in the past. So it's a medium that can be used to share information, but the information you've got to look at because it's not always true. Because depending on who's putting the information out there, it could be false. So I don't think there's a perfect, it's probably the closest we're going to come. So, but that's pretty much it. I'm going to go to you, and then you, and then you. So we'll go right around. And so we'll start here, there, and then we'll fit over there.
Quick question. Could you talk about how the county is working with the greater governments in this area to, just address, the economic inequities like in the city and economic development, jobs, things like that? And it's a big, huge problem, but just wondering how the county is helping.
The question was in regards to how's the county playing a role in economic inequity, working with governments in the area, economic development. Economic development is much stronger than in the other areas because in economic development we have a number of very good partnerships, working with the city of Buffalo, working with towns. The Erie County Industrial Development Agency is the largest of those. Gentleman in the back wanted to ask about IDAs earlier. The problem we have in our community is we have a community of 954,000 people with now 5 IDAs. It was 6 when I was county executive. We got rid of one of them. But we have 5. New York City has 1 IDA. It's a little larger than 950,000 people. So we still have too many levels of government that are involved in some of this on the local level, but there is really good work between local officials, cities and towns, the county and the state. I will say that I think we actually are in a much better position than we ever were. One of the things that I implemented when I took office as county executive was to create a one-stop economic shop in Buffalo. If you were a site selector coming in to look at a place here and you wanted to talk to the Erie County Industrial Development Agency, you went to one address. You wanted to talk to Empire State Development, you went to another address. If you were looking at something in Buffalo, you went to another address. I said, this is stupid. I mean, just put them all in one building, and basically they're all now sharing 3 floors, and there's this great cross collaboration. It's at 95 Perry Street. So everything's in one building now, and everyone works together where they never would see each other, and they'd send an email, and that's about it. So it's created, I think, part of the climate, which is why we have this very strong economy that we hadn't had for a long time. On the equity issues, it's a little different. The county plays a massive role in health and human services where most of the low-level governments don't. We're a $1.9 billion budget. That's with a B, not million, billion. And more than $1 billion plus goes to health and human services. We provide the programs that are generally considered federal programs. Medicaid, temporary assistance for needy families, supplemental nutrition assistance program. It's the new name that nobody, oh, what's that? It's food stamps. Everybody knows what food stamps are. It's the old food stamps program. Those all go through county government. So we are at the forefront of addressing issues with economic inequality because our goal is to lift people up. When an economy gets stronger, all boats rise with the tide, except if the boat's got a hole in it and that boat stays down. So what you want to do is how do we figure out a way, we're not going to necessarily give that person a new boat, to patch that boat. Get the water out of the boat so that it will rise. That's part of what our Live Well Erie plan was geared towards, was addressing these issues of economic inequality to ensure that everyone is given their best opportunity to go forward. I'm the first person from my family to graduate college. My father was a steel worker. My mother raised myself and my 2 younger brothers, then went to school, got her nursing certificate, but I'm the first one to graduate with a bachelor's. And I'm a very familiar story in this area. A lot of people worked very hard. The goal is to create the best opportunities so that everyone has a chance to lift themselves up and do what I did. Go to college, go to law school, move on. Some people would say I'm in a worse position now than my parents were as an elected official. But I think it's important that you give people the opportunity. And that's often what we hear from parents who come in our offices seeking assistance. Listen, I'm not looking for a handout. I just want to give a better life to my kids. So I need more food. Help us. Or the big thing that we're dealing with right now is housing. We used to be able to rent a significant amount of homes from our social services to help people if they lost their house. We've lost a lot of that because the homes are so expensive now that landlords are getting $1,400, $1,500 a month for a home. Just a few years ago, they were getting $600, $700 from DSS. So housing is a huge issue because you cannot have a strong, good life if you do not have permanent housing. Next.
So why is it legal to promote false facts?
Why is it legal to promote false facts? First Amendment. The point the gentleman is saying, why is it legal to promote false facts? What gives you the right to do that? The First Amendment does until it reaches the level of slander or defamation. And I've been slandered and defamed so many times, I just ignore it, but it bothers my family about things that are said about me, things I've done, which I haven't done. I look at it as what you have to do is you have to have an educated group of individuals who understand that that's false. The problem is there are some individuals who just, it must be true. My Aunt Ginny posted it on Facebook. Remember during COVID, and I talk about my hypothetical Aunt Ginny, who would post things on Facebook that were false? I do not have an Aunt Ginny. I have another aunt that rhymes with Ginny who would do that. And I'd have to say, no, that is not true. But my friend posted it. She wouldn't post it if it was false. Well, what if she didn't know it was false? Oh. So you have to do that. You have to have that conversation. Legally, the First Amendment gives people the right to say vile things. There was during COVID when they were protesting, they had a protest where they drive in front of the Rath building and they go around Niagara Square. And one of the trucks had a Confederate flag on it. And I took a picture of it and I posted it, and it was one of my most popular posts ever. I also got a lot of criticism for it. It says, the First Amendment gives that individual a right to fly the flag. The First Amendment also gives me the right to call them a ding-dong. And it was like, yay! And then people were like, he's not a ding-dong, he can do that. I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm saying, is the First Amendment gives them a right to express something which is vile. It's not states' rights, it's subjugation of people. It also gives me the right to tell them, say that, that's wrong. And that's where people have to come in. Because in our country, there is no prohibition about sharing false facts. And the sad part is, you can find anything you want if you look for it today on the internet. And then when good people, especially those who aren't really knowing what they're doing, are sharing false facts, it creates the snowball effect. Individuals with college education who share false facts, yeah, it happens. The one thing that I actually wish would happen in our educational system, we talk a lot about STEM. I'm a history nerd. We need to go back to teaching civics and history. When people do not know their history, they share and do bad things. I've gotten in conversations with individuals. I don't get in conversations anymore on social media, but I used to get in conversation with individuals who would criticize us on health. They were armchair epidemiologists. They'd criticize us on urban planning issues. They were planners. They'd criticize me on law, and they'd say they know better. And I'd go, where'd you get your law degree from? Where'd you practice? Oh, I don't need a law degree to know that. I go, well, you're wrong, because here's what the law says. But you have to have, I don't do that myself personally anymore on social media. If I deal with the person one-on-one, I will. But I think we all have an obligation to do that, because that's how you stop it. When Aunt Ginny shares something and no one else says, oh my Lord, that's false, then other people read it, and the next thing you know, other people believe it. I actually had the conversation with my Aunt Ginny saying, Aunt Ginny, take that down, that's wrong, it's false. Oh, but my friend shared it. That doesn't mean it's true. Okay. She took it down. So that's what has to happen. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. In your line of work, you have to have a thick skin. And I just wondered if you have any tips for those of us who are, thinking about speaking up, and then we're likely to get some pushback.
The question was, in my line, you have thick skin. If you're going to be standing up and talking and getting about this, how do you handle that and pushback, and also your personally? You have to understand, no matter what you say, some of these people will criticize you. You have to have the facts with you. That's what it comes to. You have to have the facts. And when you have the facts, you give it to them. You hit them over the head with the facts. They may not believe it, but you give them the facts. And know they're going to probably criticize you anyway. I've come to a point now where it doesn't matter what I say. I'll give you an example. I posted recently, not on my personal page is actually pretty good, like on Facebook, but on my county executive page, I congratulated one of our employees. They had a child. And it was like, hey, wonderful. One of the first criticisms was, why would anybody bring a child into this community today under your leadership? I don't know, the population's growing, some people must like it. It's like, it doesn't matter what you say, there are people who will criticize you. It's like, hey, the sun came out. I'm surprised you didn't fill it with belch coming out of your mouth. Oh, you blocked the sun. It's like, it doesn't matter. There are people who will do that. The difference is when good people, and enough of them, say you're wrong, and let other people know they're wrong. That's what matters. The newspapers, getting back to newspapers, generally pretty good about saying this is wrong. Television media is not. Not just nationally, but locally. it took me a while to realize is television media is the you decide. We're not making any distinction here. And we've called them sometimes. You have to make a distinction because that's false. And the way we've gotten them is you're spreading slander. Ooh, then they talk to their attorneys and they'll do a retraction. The statement by Joe was incorrect and we note it for the record. So you have to kind of understand when it comes to getting the information out there, it's incumbent upon all of us to share it, but the media does not always look at it that way. They look at it, there's Joe's view, there's County Executive Poloncarz's view. Who's correct? Well, there's only one set of facts. Joe could have his opinion, but the facts say it's this. The problem is the media, in their eyes, their view is we let the voters decide. We let the watchers decide. I think most of you know I have a little tiff with a station that thinks they're on your side. They're not, but they're doing it for ratings. And since the ratings have gone down, now they're like, oh my Lord, what do we do? Why? Maybe because the other stations are actually doing better news. That's what they should do. Media could be held accountable by turning it off. If you don't like what they're saying, you turn it off. I'll go to you and then over here. Yes, sir.
What are we going to do with the problem of marijuana? If you look at the New England Journal of Medicine article that came out this year, they point out that Colorado, where they had a tremendous amount of use of marijuana, plus the combination of people drinking alcohol with it, the accident rate has gone up about 40%. That's vehicular accidents. I know that none of us would want to be hit and seriously injured by people that are both incapacitated.
Drunk and high. I don't know if everybody could hear what he's saying. Let me just, I'll make a summary because not everybody heard it. Is what are we doing about the marijuana problem? I used an example of Colorado in which they legalized marijuana and they started to see many more incidences of accidents and things like that. It is a serious problem from a standpoint of a health risk. I will note our health commissioner, like almost every other health commissioner, was against the legalization of marijuana because of the issues associated with, number one, it's very difficult to immediately determine if an individual is high in marijuana as compared to alcohol. Alcohol, you can do a number of tests. Marijuana, you can't, right on the side of the road. You basically have to get a blood drawn. You won't get results for a while. Marijuana is legal. It's not going anywhere. It is going to be legal. The question is, how is it enforced? How are we as a society going to be taking individuals off the roads who are behind a vehicle? Marijuana is legal now. You can have marijuana and smoke it. You can sort of purchase it locally. There's some stores that are opening. I've driven down the road on a summer day with my windows open and I'm like, oh boy, the car in front of me, they're smoking marijuana. You can smell it. The problem is less often that it's the individual who's chewing a gummy. You can't smell that, but they could be high as a kite. So it is a problem. They needed to address the Rockefeller drug laws that threw people in the jail for the rest of their life for marijuana possession or selling marijuana. They did that. But the issue associated with now marijuana legal, it's going to cause problems that are foreseen. And they're not unforeseen, they're foreseen. The problem is, how do you address it? And I think everyone's having problems. Law enforcement, the most, because they're like, other than we pull this person over for unsafe driving because we see them going down the road, but when we talk to them, you can't smell anything on their breath. You can tell they're baked, but you can't determine immediately they're high, so you got to use some other probable cause to potentially arrest them, and that doesn't always exist. So it is an issue, and I would like to say that it'll get solved soon, but I don't think so because it's legal and it's not going anywhere. Yes, sir.
Two major infrastructure projects seem to have fallen away. Peace Bridge and tearing down Skyway. What's happening?
The question was about two major infrastructure projects, the Peace Bridge and the Skyway. The Peace Bridge, rather than building a new bridge, both toll plazas were greatly expanded, especially the Canadian side. which made a big difference on transit times. There are still times in which there's delays, but it's not as big as it used to be because there's now more of border. The problem now isn't always has to do with the spaces, is are there enough individuals, the customs officials at the gates to handle the incoming amount of traffic? So the Peace Bridge there will not be a second span anytime soon because they don't really need it as long as the two customs areas are properly managed with the number of Border Patrol and customs officers. The Skyway, I was always a proponent for tearing down the Skyway. The problem is it's New York State that owns and controls it. Brian Higgins wanted the Skyway down, but this goes to show that unless you have somebody overarching who controls the Department of Transportation, it's not going anywhere. The Skyway is important that it is the major thoroughfare that heads to the South Towns. If you were to take down the Skyway, you still have to build a different thoroughfare. And there was and still technically on the books, is what's called the South Towns Connector, which when Route 5 hits Tiff Street is 2 lanes both ways. Traffic would be diverted onto what would be now more of a superhighway on Tiff Street, and then it cuts across through what would be considered railway right-of-way area that's no longer needed because they don't have as many rail lines to hook into the 190. It would be a ridiculously expensive project, probably over $1 billion. So if you tear down the Skyway, you just can't tear it down and say that's it, because you need to be able to get that traffic that goes to Hamburg, Evans, Lackawanna, Blaisdell, and there are thousands and tens of thousands of cars that traverse it daily. So the issue is, if you tear it down, which I think actually is better for development in the city and the area around it, you will help spur additional development on the land that's underdeveloped now because of how the Skyway goes. But you would still have to build an alternative. And the alternative was the South Towns Connector. There wasn't the will at the state to do it, nor someone advocating, I'm going to drop $1 billion to help build the South Towns Connector. This will be the last question. Yes, sir.
Is there anything you can do to help the Sabres get their act together?
Is there anything I can do to help the Sabres get their act together? I did coach hockey for 10 years. I still play, but no. It pains me because they actually have the talent. The Sabres have the talent, and their goaltender UPL the goaltender was the biggest question mark coming into this year. Everyone thought Devin Levi was going to be the savior. I was a little worried because he just came out of college, and almost no one goes from college to the NHL because it is a totally different level. But UPL's playing well. The one thing that we thought was going to be good the year that we weren't going to have to worry about was the offense, and they either score 5 or 6 goals a game or 1. So that's a whole different level. I don't want to say it's coaching because I think Coach Don Granato has done a pretty good job with what he's had these last few years, but teams are now realizing the Sabres have offense. The Sabres, you shut down certain lines, you could shut the Sabres down. And if you remember back, and this is the hockey player in me, hockey coach, when the last time we had a good team, everyone talked about Chris Drury and Danny Briere, but Thomas Vanek was on the 4th line, scoring nearly 40 goals in his rookie season in his second year, and he was the 4th line. To be a good NHL team, to make the playoffs, you got to have 2 high-scoring lines. To be a competitive league for the playoffs, you got to have 3 lines and a 4th line that can not only check the heck out of the team's best line, but can score. And right now, the Sabres still have 2 lines, and some nights they only have 1. So, and they've had bad injuries. They've been hit with injuries. So I think the team's still on the up. I don't believe they're going to make the playoffs this year unless they win 20 in a row. But I do feel confident that they're headed in the right direction. I like what Kevin Adams is doing. He's getting a lot of critique. Don Granato's getting a lot of critique. But I think they deserve to get through this year and then to see how things go next year. And we do own the hockey arena. The county owns the hockey arena. We lease it to the Sabres. So the next time we have negotiations, I will make certain we put a playoff clause in there. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.